Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November edition of Just Moves In's residential expert discussion. I'm here with Mark Hayward again, former CEO of Property Mark and a Just Move In advisor. How are you doing, Mark?
Well, I think at least I'm keeping warm and it's not raining. So,
Of course, there've been a few storms in government as well, hasn't there? I mean, a lot has changed again since we spoke a month ago, and we now have a new Prime Minister.
we do indeed.
Again.
And we obviously have had it's not really a reshuffle, isn't it? It's a removal of certain ministers and new ones and indeed old ones coming back, because we have Michael Gove back as Secretary of State for the Department of Levelling Up and Housing and Communities, but very much the architect of the PRS white paper. Soon we hope to move into legislation.
Yes, and you probably suspect that I'm going to ask you about that in just a few minutes' time. Yeah, but before we talk about Mr. Gove, let's quickly talk about Jeremy Hunt, because we have an important autumn statement coming up on the 17th of November, I think it is. What are you anticipating from that, or what would you like to see for the housing sector?
What I'm anticipating and what I would like to see are probably two different things. I think the horizon for this has been painted very, very black. I don't think anybody is expecting particular good news. We don't know whether there's going to be any changes into taxation, into benefits, but we are, I think, entering an era of austerity. Things, of course, can change. What I would have liked to have seen is help for tenants, particularly those that are going to be in difficulties in terms of heating their own homes. We know we've had some gestures, some sort of support. It would be nice to see that there is an encouragement for first-time buyers who were encouraged when the stamp duty was changed, but because the interest rates now have moved so far upwards, they are really not in a position to buy. And I think, talking about first-time buyers, if you are buying with, let's say, a 10 or 15% deposit, and property prices do drop, as a number of talking heads, and we might come back to that, are predicting, then they're immediately going to be into a negative equity. So are they going to be encouraged to buy, or are they just being encouraged to sit on the fence, continuing to put further pressure on the private rented sector? So I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, it's a little bit gloomy. I mean, from a political point of view, it's probably good to set expectation levels low. I guess the thing that's going to be tough is that we're going to have a period of austerity and with tax rises on top, whereas normally you wouldn't expect necessarily the two things together. Yeah, but I mean, this is probably a good time to introduce Michael Gove into the discussion. Michael Gove is a bit of a Marmite personality, let's say, but he does have a reputation in certain circles for getting things done, which is obviously a good thing. Do you think his appointment or reappointment, as he's returning, will be well received in the sector?
I think generally so, for the reasons that you've just said. Also, he knows the sector. He's been involved with it before, so it's not a standing start. It's slightly plug and play. He can get on with it, and I think the renters reform legislation would be a really good opportunity for him to get something done and get something done quickly. Whether there is, the parliamentary time in the coming Parliament to do that, we don't know. We've had various statements from various housing ministers underneath the Secretary of State to say, yes, it's still on the agenda, but it will happen in due course. We don't really know what in due course means. But I think hopefully we are going to enter a period of relative political stability, which will allow those charged with getting it done to do it, and then also allow the civil servants to actually get on with it, because every time a minister changes, the briefing to the civil servants, A, will be slow coming out because they have to establish the minister's priority, and B, trying to accommodate what will be a long list, because as soon as you get appointed to a Secretary of State, you will receive letters from every organisation and action group saying you should put our issues and problems at the top of the list. So I'm not expecting to see much, probably much before Christmas in terms of direction of travel, but I am encouraged.
Yeah, I mean, politically, I imagine the Conservatives feel that they need to get the Renters Reform Bill over the line, don't they? I mean, they've been talking about it. I mean, they were talking about it with when Theresa May was Prime Minister back in the previous decade now, 2019. And we've talked before, haven't we, about how the political winds of change and how there does very much seem to be a narrative now that tenants don't have enough powers, and it's going to be politically expedient for the Tories to do something for tenants, especially as they're behind in the polls. So perhaps there is a momentum now building whereby they have to get on with this because it's not going to look very good at the next election.
We hope so. We hope so. Just have to wait and see what signs are given, what indications are given. But certainly, I think that the issue over Section 21, which was on the cards and then off the cards and back on the cards now, I think, reading between the lines and looking at what Michael Gove has previously said, that will be dealt with as they've indicated. So it's not going to fall off the agenda, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it was good. It was good to see Michael Gove doing the media rounds at the weekend. I saw him on, was it the week before now, actually? He was on Sophie Ridge's show on Sky, and then with Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC. And he was kind of reaffirming his desire to, to build more houses, which we'll come onto now. But he was also mentioning the decent home standard. We haven't really talked about the decent home standard before. I mean, what do you expect to see from that?
It's very difficult because it has to apply both to the private rented sector and to social housing as well. I think we're going to see it first in social housing. The decent home standard is very difficult. How's it going to be enforced?
Yeah.
When the government doesn't know where all the landlords are, and that comes back to there should be a register of landlords and then a redress system for landlords and tenants. We've already got the EPC requirements within 2 years now to be minimised at C, so that's got to be put in place. So I think whilst you can talk about it, actually to get it done is much more difficult, and to monitor it and to actually demonstrate that it's working, when in fact the majority of housing is in the hands of private landlords who, with increasing interest rates, may have an affordability issue in any event.
So it's going to take time, basically. It's not, you can't just say that these are the new standards and then get everyone to adhere to them straight away, of course. I mean, of more significance, perhaps broadly for the property sector, is that Michael Gove has recommitted the government to reaching this 300,000 new properties every year to be built, which is something that Liz Truss described as Stalinistic, or Stalinist rather, which seemed like a curious word to use in describing the target. But Michael Gove now has recommitted to that target, although he does admit that it's going to be very hard.
I think he's right in putting a target there, because if you don't have a target, how do you know how far you are going to achieve it? A series of housing ministers and governments have always adhered to this 300,000. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. It hasn't yet been reached. The construction of houses, as we know, is in the hands predominantly in house builders in the private sector. So they are going to need, firstly, an easier route to getting planning, because it takes in fact years probably for them to acquire a site or acquire an option on a site and take it through the planning process. And that's linked with infrastructure Section 106 agreements and a lot of local involvement or local angst. And again, are they going to run ragged bulldoze local feelings and pursue targets? If you're bulldozing local feelings, whether they're NIMBYs or bananas, that's going to have an impact in a government that's going to the polls within 2 years. So yes, great to have a target. How they achieve it from a standing start, I don't know, because you need huge resources in terms of people. That we know there's already an issue with materials availability and particular cost. House builders are there to make a profit. They are not there to produce a volume of houses that satisfies the government, but may result in house pricing being lowered if the element of supply increases quite rapidly.
Which is something, of course, that developers don't want. They don't want to flood the market with new houses and reduce the price of these things. I guess, to me, what's frustrating is you use the expression there, how the government are going to reach this target from a standing start, but it shouldn't really be a standing start. I mean, it's been evident for some time, hasn't it, that the shortage of houses is probably the big issue in the sector at the moment. It's kind of frustrating that not more has been done up to this point.
No, I mean, we've been talking about a shortage almost since Maggie Thatcher introduced the right to buy, which took a whole swathe of property out of the rental sector because it was owned by local authorities, and it's very difficult to actually see how you can achieve it unless you give some huge tax breaks, for instance, to developers, or make. And they've already talked about enterprise zones. We already have garden towns and garden cities. But to make property affordable, you have to build in areas that possibly aren't popular. Therefore, are they going to satisfy the need if there isn't that, latent demand out there for the product? Unless, of course, they can encourage people on the build-to-rent sector massively.
Yeah. What would you do, Mark? I mean, this is probably the toughest question I've ever asked you. But if Michael Gove was to suddenly phone you up and say, "Would you like to swap places?" What do you think you'd be trying to do?
It wasn't the most difficult question. When you asked for my PIN number, I found that quite. Give you an answer. I think there's got to be much more focus on where and why people and where they live, in what they're living. There's probably an initiative to encourage last-time sellers and last-time buyers to actually do something rather than live in, how fully occupied are the majority of homes. I would suspect a very high proportion have low occupation, probably just couples, particularly when you look at those over 55, over 60. Children have left doing their own thing, but people are not moving into not retirement homes has an awful stigma because you immediately think of a small flat. We haven't got it right. If you go to the States and some of the European countries, they've made huge efforts to create quality accommodation for those in later life. And again, that has a connotation about later life, but those that don't need a 5-bedroom house, but they can buy something that's smaller in terms of bedrooms, still offers quality in a community or whatever. So I would look at that. If you're going to create 300,000 houses, you've got to have someone to buy them. So we've got, at the moment, historically very high interest rates, and that is, I think, shocking for the younger generation who've never experienced rates anything like this. Some of us who are more mature, as I say, have seen high rates of interest, and on that rates of interest, we are now seeing people talk about interest rate peaking, even coming down. So there is a little bit of light on the horizon. So it's just getting used to that. So what would I do? I'm really not sure what you can do when there are so many factors in play in terms of housing, in terms of ownership of land, and in terms of construction.
Yeah, it's it's quite tricky, isn't it? I do not envy policymakers in this day and age. I guess if it was simple, they'd have sorted out the problems by now. I mean, another problem that I wanted to move on to now are the problems facing private landlords at the moment. We've talked before, haven't we, about how this narrative that seems common in the media at the moment, that they're somehow the bad guys, which has always seemed quite a curious stance to take in the middle of a housing crisis, because we need landlords. But I mean, it seems very difficult. I mean, a standout statistic for me from reading the papers recently is a statistic in the Telegraph that shows that 1 in 6 homes for sale at the moment is a former rental property. Yeah. Which suggests that the number of private landlords is decreasing, and they're looking for a way out.
Yeah, absolutely, James. And I think when you look down that set of statistics further, you'll see that only 1/3 of those properties that were buy-to-let and being sold are being bought by other landlords. First-time buyers doing well at 47%, but that's the disturbing fact. Whereas before, they would have been snapped up by buy-to-let landlords, whether they are small landlords or whether they're larger landlords. So I think there is a concern for them that not only are interest rates going to rise, so to buy them, they'd have to take out new finance. A lot of them are on fixed rates, a lot of which expire within 12 months. And increasingly, as you said, the landlord is being seen as a villain, where in fact, a tiny proportion are doing it badly. The majority are not, because they see, if you have a good tenant, you have a good property, it's well maintained. You don't want to put the rent up too high because you want that good tenant to stay. And then, of course, we've got the taxation issues, which have been cumulative over the last few years, stamp duty. There's not a lot out there to actually encourage someone to be a landlord.
Yeah, which is obviously a massive problem, because there's a chronic shortage of available properties to rent at the moment. So that's another problem that we need to solve somehow.
Absolutely, and again, that's is that in the government's hands? Probably to a certain extent, yes. Is it an education piece to inform people that you can, if you are a landlord, it's not going to be punitive. At the moment, it is pretty punitive, and you're not in the short term. You're probably not going to see, if you're buying now, any great house price inflation. You probably get a better rent. So your return is probably quite good, but you're as you're saying, you're going to be paying more for the money. So you need that increased interest rate to make it even attractive to you as a yield. And I think there is a sort of dash for cash at the moment in terms of investment, with people, as I said, very wary about whether it's the stock market or whether it's the property market. So it's better to have it, under your mattress or in the bank than it is out there that's something speculative. And the other thing is, of course, that buying a property takes time. We can't just go out and buy a property. It's not easy. It's not something anybody looks forward to. It's a bit like the dentist, I really don't want to go there. Well, I don't, but others might. So if we can look at reforming the house buying and selling process to make it much easier, much quicker, whether there's some incentives, whether they're long-term or short-term, to people to buy, that needs to be looked at. But as you know, we saw the initiative on stamp duty, which was almost wiped out, and stroke with interest rates going up fourfold.
I'm wondering if the government can be a little bit more careful about the language that they use as well sometimes. When Michael Gove was doing the media rounds, I referred to earlier in our conversation, he described some landlords as nefarious chancers. He definitely used the word chancers. And that's quite dangerous language to use, because it really does. No one wants to be labelled a chancer. And if they're worried that if they become a landlord, this is how they're going to be seen socially, it's quite awkward.
But I know in the past of speaking to senior civil servants in the housing sector, that the Secretary of State and Minister's postbag is full of complaints. They don't. No one writes to say, just like to let you know, Mr. Gove, I've got a fantastic landlord. He's doing everything right. No. So they only hear and see the bad element. But when you look at the size of the rental sector, it's tiny. It's tiny. It's tiny. But I suppose what we should be doing is looking at taking housing out of politics, because it shouldn't be political, because it's about homes and people's life and being. It shouldn't be a ping pong ball to be hit backwards and forwards by one government and another. Whether you need a national, perhaps we do. Perhaps we need a national building company that is owned by the state, funded by whoever, that builds these houses, whether they're for the rented sector or whether it's for sale, on land. A lot of the land is already owned by government. And perhaps we take it out of the private sector and have something that's more nationally focused.
Yeah, I quite like that idea of having taking it out of politics. I mean, obviously very difficult to do, but in theory, there's nothing stopping them from having a cross-party committee that comes together and thrashes out these kind of issues. There were suggestions during the Brexit crisis that there could be some sort of cross-party committee that could implement Brexit. Maybe housing is a better subject area to tackle. I don't know.
Well, it needs tackling, and somebody's got to come up and pull everybody together to make sure that it is tackled, and make sure that we do more houses out there for buying or selling or renting.
Well, one positive I can reveal today through my digging is that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, obviously, is a landlord himself. He owns a property in Pimlico, a property in Surrey somewhere, but he also owns 7 buy-to-let properties in Southampton, in Ocean Village, which is very nice. So maybe he'll have landlords' interests at heart. We'll have to wait and see.
We will indeed, but having given evidence to a number of select committees, when the MPs involved have to declare any interest they have, it's unusual to find an MP that doesn't have an investment property or buy-to-let, and some of them have a number. And if we go back a few years to the former Chancellor Philip Hammond, he actually had a building company, building housing. I think it was elderly, but it wasn't social, it was a private enterprise. So they've all got property assets and property interests. That's probably the wrong reason why they should be doing something.
Yeah, possibly. Let's not go there, maybe.
Mix of politicians.
Yeah. I'd love to go there and talk more about this, but perhaps we should. We're up against the clock a little bit, and we should move on to the next thing, which is that obviously this weekend we have the start of COP27. Climate is back on everyone's agenda. Not that it should have ever left the agenda. We had the controversy with will Rishi Sunak go or not. I think he made the right decision in going, although it's a shame that he took some time to reach that decision. But I'm just wondering, from a property sector perspective, what you think we might see from COP. And I just wanted to briefly discuss the challenges facing the sector in reaching net zero. Because again, this is another tricky one.
It is a tricky one. If we look at the housing sector and we're looking at owner occupiers to bring their property up to a highly energy efficient structure will take a lot of money. All right, we're currently focused on the costs of energy, so I think that is in a bizarre way will help people react positively to any proposals on energy efficient, net zero, on those sorts of things like that. But again, it's going to take time. We've got to make a start, and obviously with the current international conference going on, there is huge focus on it. It's whether those decisions, if they are decisions rather than just guides, are adopted in a wholesale manner when we're in a difficult economic state. So yes, great. Let's see whether or not it resonates and moves forward in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, we've got particular challenges, haven't we, in the UK, and that compared to a lot of Europe, our housing stock is very old. And I guess retrofitting these properties to improve their EPCs is going to be very expensive, particularly for landlords, as we were saying. But then again, if you demolish these buildings and start again, as it were, and build new homes, then that has a carbon footprint too. So how do you kind of, it's very difficult to know what to do. What is the solution? What is the better route?
Well, new homes, you can get there quite quickly, even though there's a cost, and well, a house builder, they're already having to meet some pretty stringent levels of efficiency. Owner occupiers, are they, or do they just turn the thermostat down? You talked about, the age of property in this country. Well, currently a property's got to last about 300 years, because on the way that we're on the level that we're replacing property, it's going to take a long time. You talked about the efficiency of older homes. There are homes out there that will just be physically impossible to come up to that, not only carbon zero, but that element of energy efficiency. So it's going to be different from other areas. You go to the States, a house is only going to last for 15 years, 20 years, then they bulldoze it and build another one. But over here, they don't. So again, it needs to have, something needs to happen or be made to happen, and be measured on it, and to be targeted, and to actually achieve it. And that's the difficulty. There's a lot of rhetoric out there, there's a lot of talk, but is there a lot of action?
Yeah, maybe people need to be thinking about offsetting. So if they live in a property that does have a higher carbon footprint, they look at ways to offset their contribution to in carbon. I don't think anyone's suggesting having wind turbines in the back gardens, but we might end up with more solar panels on roofs and things like that, which are becoming more acceptable, I think. It'll be interesting to see if anything comes out of COP that's specifically related to housing. I certainly hope so, and I guess we'll watch the space.
Absolutely, we'll see what comes out.
We'll see what comes out. Yeah. So I think that just about rounds things off for this month. It'll be the December edition. December, the last one of the year. We'll have a little Christmas edition then in a month's time. And hopefully we have, because today's been quite downbeat actually, hasn't it? Normally we're quite optimistic and bullish, but I think today we've been slightly downbeat.
James, I think we've been realistic. I don't think there's a need to be huge. Pessimism is easy, it's contagious, isn't it? Pessimism. And we just have to look at the headlines and the papers. There's nothing good. There's nothing good about it.
There's nothing good in the media ever.
No, I think we're into that, shock horror Daily Mail headline or the Sun headline, and it's very easy to talk, if we're talking about the market, to talk it down. Lots of good things happening, but we find it difficult to focus on them.
Well, let's bring everyone some Christmas joy next month.
Lovely. I look forward to your Christmas outfit then, James.
Oh, I'll have a hat. You just watch. Well, thanks for your time, Mark, and thanks to everyone for watching as well. See you next month. Bye.